Welcome back. I'm sure you've had a good break now that we've gotten through services and we've taken so much time to go through so many things in this series so far, right? Everything about NSX has been covered. Well, almost. Because we haven't talked about users. We haven't talked about roles. We haven't talked about permissions, any of that kind of stuff. That's what this series of videos is all about. That's what we're going to get into here. Over a course of a couple of relatively short videos. There's only so much to think about with permissions, only so much we can teach you about, and then you're going to go and apply that. So we're going to look at Identity Manager, VMware Identity Manager. We're going to look at LDAP, and we're going to look at role-based access control. Those are the three specific topics that we're going to get into here. And we're going to do that literally in three separate videos. We're going to look at these each in kind. As we talk about VMware Identity Manager and integrating with LDAP, those two things, those are going to help us get external users into NSX so that we can apply permissions and things like that. And then finally, we're going to talk about the actual role-based access control side of things inside NSX. So let's get going, right? Let's talk about VMware Identity Manager and NSX here together. This is really neat stuff. Now, before we dive in, we're going to talk about what VMware Identity Manager actually is. You may be thinking, well, this is an NSX course. Why do I need to worry about VMware Identity Manager? Well, VMware Identity Manager is a really neat identity broker that VMware has been producing for quite some time now. We call it Identity as a Service. And what we're doing with VMware Identity Manager is providing application provisioning. We're providing conditional access, right? If I'm on this network, then go ahead and let me in. Otherwise, if I'm on that network, deny access to the resource, all kinds of things like that. And then in context here, rather importantly, how about single sign-on? How about I log into, I authenticate once against Identity Manager, and then whatever applications Identity Manager is managing for me, well, they can all use that same credential, that same login, right? So there's a lot of cool stuff about VMware Identity Manager that we may want to bring to the table. Now, I'm going to use VMware Identity Manager when I need something more than just LDAP. When I need something more than just, an Active Directory server that I'm requesting user authentication against, right? So if I need multi-factor authentication, if I need smart cards, if I need single sign-on across an enterprise, across multiple platforms that maybe don't support LDAP natively but support OAuth, these are the kinds of reasons that I'm going to choose VMware Identity Manager. Now, VMware Identity Manager is a virtual appliance. It's a service we deploy through an appliance. So we'll have to deploy that appliance and manage that. And fortunately, it's a pretty straightforward thing, but we're going to have to deal with that. In many cases, you may already have an Identity Manager infrastructure. If you're a VMware Workspace ONE customer, you've probably already got this. You can probably tie into what you've got. If you're not a Workspace ONE customer, that's fine as well. That's why we're talking about this. You get that basic entitlement with NSX if you need those advanced features. Deploying this is going to be a matter of deploying a virtual appliance, or perhaps multiples, depending on what you're looking at, right? If you're looking at a clustered deployment or a single instance deployment, that's a much larger topic than what we're looking at here. But we'll deploy the virtual appliance and we'll log into the web UI of that Identity Manager VM and walk through the initial configuration where we're going to set the administrative password and we're going to specify our database. Do we want it to be the internal database? Do we want to use an external JDBC connected database? Things like that. And do all those basic appliance initialization tasks. Now, once that's all done, this is where we get into configuring things up so that we can integrate Identity Manager with NSX. So I'm going to come into my Identity Manager console, and I need to come into my directories and maybe add a directory to add my Active Directory if I'm attaching to that. This is also where I can define, my authentication methods and my different policies. When do accounts lock out? How long do they take to unlock? Do they automatically unlock? All those kinds of things. We also have to think about our OAuth client configuration. So once we're attached to a directory, once Identity Manager has some place to go look for user accounts and actually do some authentication, we need to start preparing for the actual NSX integration, which means we need to create an OAuth client. We need to get the certificate thumbprint from the Identity Manager appliance itself. And then we're going to take that information and take it into NSX Manager, where we're going to build that integration. Well, how does that all look? Well, if we go into the catalog and we go look at remote app access and create an OAuth client, we can see here that we've collected or we've set up some information. Highlighted in green are the pieces that we need to collect. I need to make sure that I know what the OAuth client ID is. I need to know what the shared secret for the OAuth client is. I'm going to need both of those pieces of information in NSX. So the way to deal with those here is to copy them out of this UI and paste them maybe into Notepad or something like that, something that you can use a little bit later when we get to the NSX side of things. Then I need to go into the command line of the Identity Manager appliance itself. That's going to be the most straightforward way to collect the thumbprint or the fingerprint of the certificate. And we're gonna do this. The certificate is stored in user local horizon conf. That's the directory structure that we want to look at. We're going to use the OpenSSL command to take the certificate, the PEM file for the certificate, and set a SHA-256 hash to show me the fingerprint. Now, here we said, use sudo-s. That'll convert you into a root shell, right? So that'll take you into a root shell. You can go ahead and a super user shell, and you can go ahead and just run these commands as they show, and everything should work just fine. Now, you'll want to be careful with the certificate name. And make sure that that's actually the name of your certificate in your particular environment. Notice that it's prefaced with the host name, right? sa-nsxvidm-01.vclass.local. That's the FQDN for my NSX, my VMware Identity Manager virtual appliance in my environment. Go double check that in yours, right? I bet it's not the same, but you'll need to find that file, identify that file, and use this OpenSSL command to identify the thumbprint. And then you want to copy and paste that thumbprint into the Notepad file along with your client ID and your shared secret for your OAuth client. Then in NSX Manager, we go back to NSX now. Under System, we find User Management. Under User Management, there's an authentication providers that we can go look at. And in authentication providers, we have a VMware Identity Manager tab. So I can select that tab, and I can turn on Identity Manager integration. And this is where I'm going to plug in the FQDN of my Identity Manager server. This is where I'm going to plug in the client ID, the shared secret, the certificate thumbprint, all of these things that we collected. Now, I may toggle up at the top of this UI the Enable External Load Balancer integration. This helps NSX behave a little bit differently if my virtual IP for my NSX management cluster is provided by an external load balancer. So we've got some options there that we want to think about. Once I've set this up as I need it, I simply hit the save button, and then I can go look after a minute or so as we set up all the connections and build all the configurations in NSX Manager. We should see that our connectivity is up and that integration is enabled, and everything should work fine. At this point, I should be able to log in using Identity Manager. Now, that's going to look a little bit different, right? So far throughout this entire class, whenever we have had to log into NSX Manager, we've gotten a screen just like we see on the slide here, where, you know, we get the nice VMware NSX page, and we've got our username and password and the little blue graphic kind of off to the right-hand side. We're not redirecting our authentication to Identity Manager at this point. Once we enable Identity Manager integration, what do we get? We get a login screen that looks just like this. So what we've done is we've told the login page on the NSX Manager to redirect to VMware Identity Manager to provide for the authentication. And so here we see the Identity Manager login screen. If I need to log in locally, and this is something that may happen from time to time, especially if I'm troubleshooting something, or if somehow my Identity Manager connectivity has been lost, I can't talk to my identity broker anymore for some reason, I can still log into that local login page. I can still connect and authenticate locally with the admin user, and I just have to make sure I pass the local variable to the login JSP, right? So if you look at the URL here, right, my NSX manager /login.jsp (local = true. That's setting the local variable to true to tell NSX that we want to do a local login here. So that's going to help us in those troubleshooting moments when maybe we need to log in locally instead of using Identity Manager. So that's all there is to it. There is so little to doing this. It's such a simple process. Now, we could get into a whole different discussion about, you know, using Identity Manager as a broader identity management solution in your infrastructure. I'm going to recommend the Workspace ONE curriculum as a better place to go dig into that. Here, we're just looking for integration between Identity Manager and NSX, and it's a really simple process. Come back in the next video. We'll talk about how we could integrate LDAP with NSX Manager instead of using Identity Manager. We'll see you there.